When I first moved into the neighborhood, I thought I had finally found the perfect place to settle. The lawns were neatly trimmed, the streets lined with identical trees, and every driveway looked like it belonged in a real estate brochure. It was the kind of place you imagined when you thought of peaceful suburban life, quiet, orderly, and predictable. That was, of course, until the Homeowners Association reminded me exactly who was in charge. At first, I barely paid attention to them. I received their welcome packet in the mail, flipped through the pages of rules, and shrugged. I had never been the type to break regulations. I kept my grass short, my garbage bins tucked away, and my driveway clear. It wasn't until I decided to hang a small flag outside my porch that I even realized how suffocatingly controlling the law could be. It wasn't a massive flag. It wasn't gaudy. Just a modest display, attached neatly to a bracket by my front door. It wasn't political or controversial either. Just a simple emblem that held personal meaning for me, something I thought added a bit of character to my otherwise cookie-cutter home. I didn't think twice about it, until the letter came. The envelope was thin but heavy in the way only official letters can feel. I tore it open at the kitchen counter, expecting maybe an announcement about upcoming landscaping. Instead, I found a neatly typed warning. Per HOA Guidelines Section 4.2, exterior display of flags is prohibited unless specifically authorized by the board. Remove immediately to avoid fines. I remember standing there, rereading the words, trying to process the absurdity of it. No flags. Not even a small one by my porch. I looked outside at my neighbors' houses. Holiday wreaths, sports team decals, wind chimes that clattered in the breeze. But apparently, my little flag was the crime of the century. I removed it, but not without bitterness simmering in my chest. Every time I walked past the empty bracket where it had hung, I felt that same sour taste of resentment. Who decided these rules? Who had so little to do that they monitored the tiniest expressions of individuality? It was frustrating, but I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived. This time, they accused me of leaving my trash bin, in plain view, for longer than the allotted 24-hour window. The truth: the collection truck had been delayed that week, and the whole street still had bins out. But somehow, my address had been singled out. That's when I realized, I wasn't just dealing with a rulebook. I was dealing with people. People with power, people with agendas, and people who seemed to get a thrill out of flexing authority. And I wasn't going to let them push me around. The idea came slowly, almost like a whisper in the back of my mind. If they didn't want me to have a flag, fine. I wouldn't have a flag. But what if the neighborhood had something else? Something far louder, far more visible, and technically, by the letter of their own guidelines, completely allowed. I began reading the HOA manual more carefully than I had before. Every page, every clause, every line. And the deeper I went, the more cracks I started to see. They banned flags, but they didn't ban seasonal displays. They restricted political messaging, but they didn't restrict decorative banners. They prohibited permanent fixtures, but not temporary structures. And that was when the plan began to form. I didn't rush it. The secret to good revenge isn't speed, it's patience. While the HOA thought they had won, I spent weeks sketching ideas, making lists, and even walking the neighborhood to take notes. I paid close attention to which board members lived where, what annoyed them, and what could easily slip under the radar until it spread. The timing had to be perfect. Too soon, and they'd recognize it as retaliation. Too sloppy, and I'd risk fines. But just right, and I could turn their own system against them. My first move was simple: a decorative garden flag. You know the type: small, seasonal, with bright cheerful colors. The kind you see at craft stores, covered in pumpkins for fall or flowers for spring. According to the HOA manual, these weren't classified as flags, but as yard decor. I staked one into my flower bed, well within the approved size limits. And then I waited. The following week, I received no letter. No fine. No warning. They must have hated it, but they couldn't touch it. Emboldened, I added another one. Then another. Soon, I had 5 cheerful little garden flags, all technically legal. Neighbors noticed. A few even complimented them. And that's when things started to snowball. One neighbor put up their own garden flag. Then another. And another. Before long, the street was lined with them: seasonal banners, cheerful prints, sports logos. The exact thing the HOA had tried to ban was now sprouting everywhere, only in a form they couldn't regulate. That's when I knew I had them cornered. The board must have been seething, but they were powerless. They couldn't rewrite the rules overnight without a lengthy approval process. And while they stalled, the flags kept multiplying. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Because if there was one thing I had learned, it was that the HOA thrived on control. And nothing strips control faster than chaos. So I started planning the next stage, something bigger, louder, and guaranteed to drown them in complaints. The kind they couldn't ignore, but also couldn't punish. Something that would spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, until even the board members themselves would be buried under the consequences. And when the moment came, I was ready to unleash it. Once the neighborhood was covered in cheerful little banners, I could feel the tension radiating from the HOA board. Their newsletters grew sterner, their phrasing more urgent, and their patrols more frequent. But each time, they came up empty. They couldn't touch the garden flags. Every resident who displayed one was operating within the written rules. The board was left standing on the curb, helplessly staring at a street that now looked nothing like the sterile, uniform community they had worked so hard to control. But that was only the appetizer. The real course was about to be served. I had spent hours combing through their handbook, highlighting contradictions, cross-referencing rules, and finding gray areas. There were dozens of them. For every restriction they had crafted, they had left an oversight. And in those cracks, I saw opportunity. The first crack: yard art. The manual clearly prohibited structures exceeding 4 feet in height without approval, but it made no mention of inflatables. Seasonal decorations, according to their own words, were not bound by the same restrictions. That meant a 10-foot-tall inflatable turkey in November was perfectly acceptable. And so was a 12-foot glowing snowman in December. And wouldn't you know it, I just happened to have a knack for online shopping. I set up the first inflatable, a towering patriotic eagle, wings spread wide, clutching a banner that read, "Welcome." It wasn't technically a flag. It was decor, legal decor. When I plugged it in, its motor hummed to life, and the eagle rose slowly from my lawn, casting a shadow across the manicured street. Within days, neighbors followed suit. One house had an inflatable football player. Another had a giant cartoon cat. Soon, it looked like the neighborhood had been transformed into a carnival. Every yard was competing for size and spectacle, and none of it violated the rules. The HOA inbox must have been overflowing with complaints, because now, it wasn't just me pushing back. It was dozens of families, each irritated with the petty regulations, each discovering the loopholes I had opened. And they weren't shy about voicing it. If they couldn't hang flags, they would decorate their lawns to the extreme. Still, I wasn't finished. The second crack was sound. The HOA had strict quiet hours, but during the day, noise was categorized differently. According to the rules, decorative and celebratory audio was permitted between the hours of 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. That little line opened a door they clearly hadn't realized. So I bought a set of outdoor speakers, synced them with a timer, and every day at noon sharp, my yard came alive with cheerful patriotic tunes. Not too loud, just enough to carry across the cul-de-sac. And the best part, totally legal. It didn't take long for others to join in. One neighbor blasted sports anthems during football season. Another set up Halloween sound effects, chains rattling, ghosts wailing. By mid-October, walking through the neighborhood was like walking through a chaotic festival. The board meetings turned sour. I know, because I started attending them, sitting quietly in the back, listening to the chaos I had helped unleash. Member after member stood up, furious, not at me, but at the HOA itself. Complaints about noise. Complaints about inflatables. Complaints about the endless decorative clutter that had turned their exclusive community into something closer to a roadside attraction. And the board, they had no answers. They couldn't admit they had lost control. They couldn't enforce rules that didn't exist. So they sat there, red-faced, drowning in paperwork, cornered by their own rigidity. Then came the final stage. I had noticed something interesting while walking the neighborhood. Many of the board members themselves had technically illegal items on their properties. One had a shed built too close to the fence line. Another had a basketball hoop bolted permanently into the driveway. A third had garden statues exceeding the height limit. All of these violations had been overlooked, quietly ignored, until now. Armed with photos and a copy of the handbook, I submitted anonymous complaints through the very system they had used against me. One by one, the board members received their own violation notices. They were suddenly subject to the same petty enforcement they had weaponized against everyone else. And because so many neighbors were angry, others began filing complaints too. Every day, more letters, more fines, more headaches, for them, not me. It was delicious watching the tide turn. The very people who had scolded me for a harmless flag were now buried under citations. Their inbox overflowed with demands, their phones rang off the hook, and their meetings dissolved into shouting matches. The neighborhood transformed. Where once it had been silent and uniform, now it was alive, flags in gardens, inflatables on lawns, music drifting in the air. People were laughing, decorating, enjoying themselves. And while the board tried desperately to tighten control, every attempt was met with resistance. Residents had tasted freedom, and they weren't about to give it back. My revenge was complete, not because I destroyed the law, but because I exposed them. Their authority crumbled under the weight of their own hypocrisy. They had created a system so fragile that one small act of defiance, a simple flag, was enough to unravel it. In the end, I got exactly what I wanted. Not just the right to express myself, but the satisfaction of watching an overbearing system collapse from within. And every time I see the board president walk past my house, scowling at the inflatable eagle waving proudly on my lawn, I know I've won. Because in this neighborhood, thanks to me, the walk can say, "No flags allowed," all they want. But the residents have found 1,000 other ways to fly them, louder, brighter, and bigger than ever before. And that's the thing about control. The tighter you grip, the faster it slips through your fingers.